We're ready.
Should have our mics on, shouldn't we?
Sure.
That way we can,
In case we ask a question.
Yeah.
yeah, if anyone speaks. Are you
We're good.
ready? We can call this meeting to order. Mr. Cameron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So tonight I want to talk about what we've been working on for quite some time is utility services and utility rates on the water side this time. And so obviously in front of you that we'll make also public, but it is a list of the prior public communications regarding water and sewer, or at least regarding the sewer project in the city. So this is where we're following up, just kind of want to go through the overview and the background of the whole history of it, because those that are not new and people that are new to the community do not understand the history of water and sewer rates in the community. And so I kind of want to work through them so that I can explain it, but the best I can. So tonight I'm going to do a little background, and it's going to sound redundant, but at the same time, for the sake of just assuming everyone knows, or the community knows, or people that would watch this video or watching this live would know the background of it. So basically, I'm going to try to walk through. Well, can you toggle for me? Because I don't. So basically, I want to go through the goals and review. I'm going to start with the wastewater plant. So reaching our compliance deadline with DNR has been the goals of the preview of the priority for the city for quite some time. Was being in compliance from a 2011 compliance agreement. We got the 5-year renewal. So the compliance deadline and what we had to deal with on the Missouri DNR side for ourselves, because we were non-compliant, was required. But also, when you had to build the plant, if you recall that discussion, and you wouldn't have recalled, we have to build a 25-year plan. But this plant also required a phosphorus limit, which is something the city does not have when a 1 part per million. Therein lies why the wastewater plant, dealing with compliance and dealing with a future regulation, which is phosphorus and nitrate in a future regulation plus the 25-year plan, it led to the wastewater treatment plant. So this was built in '84. And I want to remind you, those that have asked me the question, this was a vote of the public people to build the plant on the north side of town, or expand it on the north side of town. Basically, it makes up a total of 13 lift stations inside the city. So basically, Republic, if you don't know, we sit at the highest point, at least right here where we're at. This is considered probably the highest point in Greene County. Our wastewater plant is just down to the north. And so majority of that is being pumped uphill, obviously, to the plant. So why it costs so much to actually treat this wastewater plant? One is it's being pumped, but there was a vote whether to put that on the south side of town or the north side of town. So any upgrades to that, as you may or may not recall, are going to be rather extensive. So when people, and Councilmember Harder will remember this, because when I first came, this was the biggest issue, was the sewer rates were so high. And the communication piece of that, so I did a publication in 2020, or I think it's 2019 or 2020, to the citizens that kind of relived the wastewater story. The interesting part of it is when they did the rate structure for that, though, it was done by public hearing. So any future sewer rates are done by public hearing. Water rates were never adjusted because they were kept lower to accommodate the sewer rate. So this is just the background. In '94, when the city failed to submit a facility plan to address capacity. '96, another settlement agreement. '97, the city submits the supplement plan to build the plant. So you can kind of see the trend that I've talked about in this list. I don't know how many public meetings to talk about the past that I do not want to deal with, but at the same time, we have to address it, and it's part of the water story as well. 2000s, the city executes a second revised settlement agreement with DNR. Legal challenges came. 2001, you get the picture. It's been an ongoing discussion. 02, 03, and then in 07, the city, after the brand new plant goes online in 2000, the city receives another notice of violation at their plant. 2010, 11, 16. 16 is when we were kind of given, the city only had 5 more years to extend it. And from that point, the city hired Burns & McDonnell to assess the wastewater and provide a master plan to deal with it. We also hired Burns & McDonnell at the same time to address our water system for what we were going to need in a long-term capital need. But the number one priority, going back to the first slide, was that we had to address the compliance issue, because it is what's called administrative order of consent. And that is what led us to the history of the wastewater rates. And then we went to the legislature, asked for the money, received $50 million from the state, but we still had to borrow $95 million to meet the requirement to pay for that. And basically, as you've heard the budget, that's the debt that we had to issue, plus what it is to our revenue side. We have to be very careful, and we're very cautious about that we're not raising more debt to pay for any more water improvements. So basically, what pays for that? The rate. So this is just the rate increases that have taken place. All that being said is, again, we will go back to the legislature in 2025, working with Representative Davison. All the people that are there will continue to ask for an additional $25 million or half of the project cost itself. I'm appreciative of the fact that we have secured the $50 million and we are spending the $50 million as the plan is under construction. But where we're at now with the water side. So we delayed and we withheld. I think the first time the water rates had been increased was last time was 2011. Then we made a minor adjustment because we were like, we want to wait to see what happens with the wastewater plant. And once we did not receive an additional $25 million from the legislature last year, we also received the $5 million omnibus bill to build the next water tower that we need for the capacity of the city per MDNR guidelines. And so I also have in front of you the budget summary. Talks about the water fund. And again, we'll make sure this is all printed and available because I don't believe it's in the slide deck, but it shows the inflow and outflows of cash by year. What I want to demonstrate is why wasn't the rate noticed until a certain period of time? Because up until 2016, the water and sewer budgets were combined. So there was just one fund called the utility fund. So it was not broken apart to demonstrate it. So basically you had both accounts together. So basically if you worked in the water wastewater budget, both budgets were combined and that's how it was distributed. So in 2016 and 17, we broke the budget apart. And what I've provided for you is how much surplus was left over in the water fund per those departments. And I want to go through these. And if Bob needs to explain it a little bit more, but I'll just show you the net surplus in 2018 was $242,715. 2019 was 130,000 some change. 2020 was 53,000. 207,000 in 2021. There's these brackets at 264,000 in 2022, and then a deficit of 334,263. That is a budget adjustment, basically, as the finance department worked through both of those accounts and looking where what was most likely being budgeted in the wastewater budget to offset the costs in the water side. So basically you're allowed by accounting standards and by our auditors. That's probably why the two budgets were combined. So technically you can use both. That's why the city probably did that. You just couldn't identify where the deficit was in the department. So once you broke them apart, it revealed that wastewater was probably helping offset the water budget for quite some time. The reason why I want to show this tower also is those that will remember all the water towers inside and outside had to be painted. There was not enough money. There was no money to paint these towers. The one on, what was it, Hines and 60 that had the mold all over it, it was past due. The inside of the tanks can rot and go bad. The way the city funded all those paintings, for those that weren't here, they were funded from ARPA dollars. So when the city got their allocation of ARPA, it went to paint the towers. So there was not a water budget assigned to this. So, because obviously $242,000 or $68,000 left over in 2024 wouldn't paint a tower. And having an enterprise fund, as I've communicated in these budgets, operating at a $68,000 surplus when you needed to have 90 days operating cash has been what the challenge has always been in this department. And it's been this way ever since the sewer plant got constructed and the rates went so much higher. I believe that is why, and anybody that has history of that any more than I do or we do, I'd be more than happy to entertain that question or understand why. But so the estimated project cost for the water tower on the North Campus, on the property donated by Convoy of Hope, has been anywhere from $10 to $15 million. It's a 1 million gallon tank. It requires it would be a well. Again, we got $5 million in omnibus. So basically, it's $10 million short of that funding mechanism. But at the same time, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll cost $15 million, but we have to generate the cash for that. In addition to, I'm going to show you, well, this is just the requirements of the Appropriations Act of 2023. And I do want to think it was then Congressman Long that helped us secure the funding, but it requires a 20% match. So if the project comes in at 10 million, then we're required to come up with the remainder of that portion. So that's kind of, again, we didn't know the complete estimate until I believe it was it October this year that we finally got the numbers. And that's why it was the delay of doing this presentation, was just waiting to get all the numbers in. So this is the anticipated issue. We issued a request for qualifications back in August of 2023. And we were awarded an EPA-approved contract for the water tower. We want to get the EPA-approved contract for the water tower and well design done in 2024, and then complete the master water model study, or complete water model study, and increase water rates to cover the capital cost for tower and well, December 2024. This is just the milestones. The anticipated completion date is March of 2025 for the NEPA award. This is when you get a federal grant, you've got to go through NEPA to secure the site, to build it on the site, and it's just part of the regulations that are required for an EPA Region 7 review. And with the consulting engineer, which is Burns and McDonnell, have been selected for this job. We have negotiated a price that fall within the guidelines or meet the requirements of EPA, because it is an EPA grant. So we got some help out of EPA, right? Then build cash flow for construction. The one thing about it is this is not needed for 3 years. We believe it has to be online in 3 years. And then we're going to advertise for construction services once cash reserves are sufficient.
And this is all for providing water to the Brookline area?
It's all for providing water to the city. The whole network is interconnected. So basically this is about the way the city runs right now, that if we've got the ability and capacity to run the water system, but if one tower goes down, there was I think it was a couple of years ago, one of the well pumps went out, and you kind of got to monitor a little bit more, but it's really to keep up with just the growth and capacity. It's not really for Brookline. We just located in Brookline to help sustain the pressure zones.
Sure.
And fire flows throughout the city. The next one, actually, another tower will need to be online in 6 years. It'll be on the south side of town, more like Island Green. Okay. So you pretty much just equally distribute them based on fire flow, size of line, not completely growth, because they all tie into one another.
Okay.
So it's really kind of like, how do you take one out of service for maintenance? It's kind of like not being able to take your car out of service to change the oil, because you don't have any other capacity to stop the car.
Okay,
That's
thank
a
you.
great analogy, but that's one I used.
Use the tires.
Use tires, yeah, I can't stop. But the other thing that's interesting related to this is water loss. So I'm going to tell you a term that most people, you don't hear, but how much water you actually lose. You get losses in your lines. The city at the beginning of each year probably averages around 30% that gets lost in leaks. And it kind of averages out to about 22% or 21%, which is actually not ridiculously bad, but it's also something that has to be addressed in the system. The best way to address that is through your metering system. So you replace the metering system, find out where the leaks are, but you have to have leak detection equipment, and that's something else that we're looking to add into this scope, is to actually figure out, because if you go build a tower for 1 million gallons and you're immediately losing 30% of it to water loss because you got slow meters, dead meters, or leaks in the line. Or you got to just unaccounted for water is what they call it. A good number is about 15%, and you probably see about an 8 or 9% decrease, I anticipate, with just a meter change, just complete metering change out. So this is the water master plan from Burns and McDonnell. So we have showed this before, but this is a refresher, but not everybody was on this council when this stuff was, when this information was presented. So the 5-year CIP need for the budget side was 33 million. The 20-year CIP is 49 million. The small main replacement is 14 million. So a 20-year total of 96 million. And again, some of this, the small main replacement, Republic has 4-inch mains in certain areas, which basically do not meet the fire flow requirements. And there's not a lot of them. I know this sounds crazy, but 14 million in small main replacements is actually not as bad as I would anticipated that would to be. So Republic's actually done a pretty decent job of our crews doing their own work in-house to take care of that. So I actually commend the crews that we've got that have actually done a lot of the replacement themselves. And the one thing that I'll also say about this is when development takes place in the city, the developer installs the water line in this, they do that. So some of these improvements just through development will also be upgraded throughout the system. So sometimes we actually loop into a development when they do the work on their site. And so we're hoping that as we continue to grow and move into those areas, that we'll also be able to connect to the newer improvements where the city's not having to do that themselves.
Okay, so the 4-inch main that you're talking about for fire protection, that was old school and they've changed it. When do they change that rule or criteria?
21 years I've been here, the city's had an ordinance you could not install anything less than 6-inch diameter.
Okay.
But Chief, I'm right, we got 4-inch mains, right?
Yes, and most of those 4-inch mains are down the old part of Republic.
Yeah. Okay. Again, thank you. That's just my information.
It is, but what makes it so difficult when you look into those areas of where you've got to replace them, you're cutting to a lot of people's property.
Yeah.
It's expensive it's like a sewer main you can, what we call pipe burst, and maybe not as intrusive. They're full replacements. And so having 4-inch just does not serve. And so the purpose of what we have to do, and it really restricts the system. So if you get to a 4-inch main, it just slows everything down into that area. So it's a bottleneck that'll have to be replaced at some point. Because otherwise you can't really capitalize on the use of the tower because it's really not being able to push it through the pipe. And so just geeking out a little bit there, but let's see. So this is where I want to start with the rate. So this is the daily average usage. So what I did with our data analytics crew is actually put together what the base rate and the flat fee. This is currently what the rates is. About 1,300 units. We have 1,300 residents on our accounts now that only use the flat fee. They do not exceed 1,500 gallons. The rest of the city either have the residential and commercial are basically, they're the exact same rate. So it doesn't matter if you use more water, less water, other than the 1,500. You can see here that the average user, 1,500 utility customers, the group is charged on average $1,590 water charges per month, or $190.80 a year. There's only 7 people currently outside our city limits. We also have about 600 active utility customers on file. So I think it rounds out to around 7,800 customers we have in total. So this is what the rates were whenever we held them best. Basically, this is what the rates were, waiting for the wastewater plant to know what to do. So we basically, because there had been no rate increase since 2011, in 2023, we brought something to the council to adjust them, maybe in 2022, to do this small incremental increase just until we could decide. And I believe that's what we was communicating until we could decide or what was going to find out about the wastewater plant, because issuing debt could have gone to the water side too. And it's important to note one other piece, Councilmember Harder. The water and sewer to Brookline is still on the debt, still on the books as a liability. So it does not expire until 2031. What I'll say about that debt and that consolidation and taking care of that, I think it's yielded enough revenue back that it's helped pay for the cost of it, that it just wished the rate would have helped cover the cost of paying for that infrastructure, so that debt would have been reduced. Because it'll be nice when that comes off the books in 2031. So it was done in 2011, so it comes off in 2031. But it has definitely yielded, it's that water and sewer out to there plus the infrastructure has definitely yielded a fairly large return. But this is what the rates were. This is and so what you can see is the bottom is the current sewer rate. At the bottom of what not the projected, the bottom is what it is, and you can see the disparity through the years of what water and sewer are. And this is where it's very difficult, because this is what we had to navigate, try to do the best we could with it. But that's just a big disparity in the numbers. And so, yeah. Now here's the proposed utility rate. So basically, to generate $10,550,000, to generate $10 million in that 3-year period, this is what the proposed flat rate would be. I'm almost proposing a whole new rate structure or any other idea of way to do it. But it mirrors very much so the sewer rate. And the surcharge, basically they're taking the same thing to generate it, and I want to explain why. Because the $95 million, instead of issuing the debt, it's either do it this way or consider even using any of our other tax structures, like our, what do we call it, the capital improvement sales tax. But really, to generate this and to build that in 3 years, that is what the rate structure, if we built the cash to do it, would need to be in a 3-year period. and it would mirror that of the sewer rate. And that is what the total cash in 3 years would generate in that rate structure. So it'd be an addition. It's not an additional $10 a year. It's an additional $3 a year in the surcharge on the commercial, or on the residential and commercial.
Can you go back to that last slide?
Yep.
Just a second. So in 2027, we're looking at an increase of, oh gosh.
It's a different rate. What I'm saying is that rate structure in and of itself, what was presented when we worked on, this was never even considered what the rate structure needed to be for the city long term. That the old structure was just stayed in place. When we sat down to write the rate structure, what it needed to be to actually keep up with the water service without issuing debt for the 17 or 18 year period, that's what it would need to look like.
Okay.
So that's all I'm saying is the proposed way to do it, if it was just by rates, is that's what it would have to look like.
Okay.
So when you're talking about that the master plan requires you to have $95 million, it's either you could borrow $95 million, which I don't recommend, but at the same time is the average water sewer bill for a user, I think, is 2,800 gallons a month. I believe it came out to $104. But as I've communicated in this body many times, I believe the water and sewer bill, especially this, because the sewer bill in and of itself is what made it so difficult to understand, I mean, where it had to be. But you can see the water side has not grown at the same pace. Chris, you could have came inside. Hey, Darren, council member.
Sorry, I'm late.
Okay. And actually, I do not want to be the, it's like, I feel like every one of these projects from the past, but at the same time, I've got to present to you what is the path, at least what I know, the information. We have to have a tower up in 3 years. We'll need a second one within 6 years. And just the growth and development of the city, but at the same time, some of it is water loss that we have to address in the metering system. And that is about almost a $3.5 million project. So the total need, I believe, is closer, would take the metering project, and that is around somewhere around $98 million. And some of that is about 15 over the next 3 years.
So that, this proposed isn't counted, is this taking in consideration the next tower?
Yes.
Or just, okay.
You have to, well, the thing about it is I'll show this right here. It shows the total cash in 3 years of $10,535,000. I want to go back one. What it does not show you, is that after the third year, it will generate $5.2 million in additional that will actually be used to pay cash for the net. Everything will be paid in cash, not paid in debt.
Okay.
See, because that's the whole objective, is not to use debt to pay for the water system. The wastewater system was a compliance issue. This is not about necessarily compliance. This is about just making sure you have adequate water supply. And the water system, like I said, the water towers we're not taking care of. The 4-inch mains, we're not taking care of at the same time. So it's kind of like having that and the metering system all replaced is kind of like what has to be addressed for the city moving forward. But quite frankly, when I go back to the first slide, the number one priority was meeting that compliance schedule with DNR. The city was under, just that was a problem for us. So a lot of that has just been deferred maintenance or deferred capital improvement. And good Lord, now I got it so warm in here I can't see. Again, a capacity, it provides us capacity in the system. I've talked about our current water loss in this group, and we've talked about it for years. And granted, you all have changed and people have come and gone, but we had to defer them. We did defer them, waiting the outcome of the legislature for the wastewater system. And anything and everything that I can possibly answer in front of you is the well tower and well project summary. Staff, if I forgot anything or jumped over anything, or if there's something you want me to go back and cover additionally, I would love to.
David, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So going back to that rate structure that the water rate is going to be at, what does that look like if the $25 million from the legislature is successful this year? Does that stay, is this taking that 25?
So that would be a whole much more fun discussion.
So that would help us in this rate structure.
Well, what would help us is, I don't believe so. I mean, I'll tell you why. Because I think you'll pay off the debt of the wastewater plant sooner. What it might help is the rate structure on the wastewater side, but it does not help it on the water, because you don't want to go borrow more money. Even if we reduce the debt by 25, if we get to 25 million and we secure the debt, I still do not think, I think that's been the objective the whole time, was to secure 75 million to the best of our ability. But then the rest of it, you need to get back on schedule what the rate should have been from
And
all those years.
for the need.
And they should have kept up, but at the same time, I get it. That vote was very political back in 97, 98. And the rates had to go up to pay for that additional $4 million to build that plant then. So what the difference is, it really suppressed the water budget to the point that, I mean, we paid Burns and McDonald to come up with the master plan of how much it was going to cost. And that's just telling you what it was going to be. I hate to be the messenger, but that's, at the same time, that's what you need to know. And that's what I wanted to communicate. I wanted it live, recorded, and kind of the background. But as you can tell from this council, this body, in this chamber, we've talked about water and wastewater several times, and it's just because that's how big of an issue it is to the compliance of the city, or complying with DNR.
What do those rates compare like to surrounding communities?
They will be the highest. Our sewer rate, our sewer rate, if you look at it comparably, I can give you the data. I've got Branson just did one. But what I can safely say is they're using ours because everyone's got to meet deadlines to comply by a certain date, and on phosphorus. So we're actually ahead of the schedule on that piece of it. But yeah, ours will be without question. But again, I'll still say ours are indicative on the fact that we've got a massive asset sitting on a hill that cost 150 million, and that offsets. That's why. I can safely tell you that's why. That's the highest, and why they will be the highest.
Well, specifically though on the water rates.
It'll be without question. Yep. I mean, because most people will issue the debt, but they're not issuing 150 or 95 million for a wastewater plant. I mean, that's for a town of 20,000. That's a pretty substantial upgrade that we had to do just to comply. But again, it was deferred maintenance on a compliance order that never really met the compliance order. So some of this is not taking care of it and having to take care of just stormwater. Because like I said, on the stormwater side, a lot of the water we take in the wastewater plant is from stormwater. And that's what they were wanting the city to address. It never got addressed. That's why I start with the wastewater side, because it is the driver of all of it. And if there is any other suggestion of how to do that, how to arrive at that, I would talk about it, but I just don't know what that is. I mean, it's like ballot measures are fun. I don't want to do that. I don't want to present that. And rate structures it's an enterprise fund. It should be the thing that funds the cost of the capital or cost of it. Doing it through other means is what makes it difficult. Is where you're going to get it. What's that look like? Capital improvement sales tax expires in 2027. It generates 1.4 million. So I'll answer any questions.
Open a casino in Republic.
Yeah.
Need a bigger body of water.
Any questions?
You may have answered this before I got in here, but what do these rates look like 10 years from now?
Well, the nice thing about the rate is what I would recommend in all the rate structures. I think every rate structure, because if you look at it, if you look at just the expenses, revenue and expenses of what it takes, it ought to be increased by the consumer price index every year, and that ought to keep up with your employees, your cost. But when you don't raise them from 2011 to this point, and you've had inflation, you've had cost of living, I would, some don't do this. I do recommend this on the water and on enterprise fund, is at least tie it to a consumer price index that it automatically goes. So if you're paying if the CPI says 3.2, then it would go up by 3.2. If it's flat, it's flat. Then you don't adjust it at all. But you have some metric that you can measure it against versus just capital. But what I will tell you is the capital plan that's been laid out by Burns and Mac. So this is another little history nugget. There was not necessarily a master, like Bob has created the master, he split the budget into two. You got a capital plan. The city's always had a capital plan, but it's never outlined what the master water sewer plan is. And so when we hired Burns and Mac in 2017, just to do a model of the city, just to model it. What happens when a fire happens at this fire hydrant? That's what gave us the idea of where the 4-inch lines were and things of that nature. So we got a good inventory, plus we got Chief Compton and everybody that just knows the system. But now we have a better number and idea of what we've actually got to do. And in October, we go to Burns and Mac in August or September? So every year we have a meeting with Burns and McDonald, the engineers that have helped us navigate the water sewer, and they go over what the current flows of the city. They have actually models of the community and how much water is being used in uptake, and how long it'll be before the city actually runs out of water. I wouldn't say run out of water, but you're issuing not a kind of what they do, watering restrictions in the summer. There's actual models that'll show when that number will actually drop and if there's a fire or something. So we actually have a pretty good idea of where we're at in our water. Our crews have done a great job to maintain the system. And even when a pump goes down, I really applaud it. But like I told them, I said, sometimes we've held on together for so long that it's going to turn into some level of urgency. But right now, we believe if we wait 3 years, possibly 4, that we'll be completely fine. It has to be in the air within 3 years. But again, the nice thing about it is, and I'll remind everyone, this is the other piece I want to remind everyone about. These would be substantially higher if the legislature didn't come through with the first 50 million. What scares me is what the number would look like without it. And I probably need to show that number, because what the water project would be without the $5 million as well. So it's not a $15 million project to us, it's actually 10 for just that side. I'll say this again, this is not on the agenda tonight. And the reason why is because I wanted to do the work session. I wanted to get this in front of you, and at the same time, I want to provide you time or ideas and anything that you want to suggest. Ask Bob, talk to the water department. I ask the history of it. There is a lot of wealth of knowledge in that group that can tell you the water system. And so if we got time, I'm gonna touch on that before the meeting, and then I'll also do it during the city council meeting as well. Any other question? Staff, anything? Bob, anything?
Is it going back on the same hill?
So it's a great question. The wastewater plant, basically, because it was not on the south side, it is all still pumped to the same spot. It's a great question, because the question is, what to build a brand new plant on the south side of town, would it cost more to redirect all the pumping and put it back onto that side of town? And the plant also discharges to Table Rock Lake. Our plant now discharges to Stockton Lake. So that's the one piece. It's a great point. Is actually, it's fortuitous for the city of Republic, is the fact that there's not a multiple group of cities, like, because Springfield flows into Table Rock. And I'm not going to go into that geeking out part of it, but there are such things as the total amount that is allowed to be pumped into there. We're not competing with the neighboring city for where it goes in there. So the only advantageous piece of it is it flows into Stockton Lake. That's a great question. I've been asked it. In fact, we actually evaluated whether to go on the south side of town, but considering the history of the south side, I think there was 3 public votes on it. Was that right?
There was a bunch. It was painful.
And they agreed to pay $4 million to build it there, additional,
Yeah.
at that time. So exponentially put that up in 2024 dollars to modify it, yeah. The good thing is, and I do love the point of it, the question, because the next wastewater plant 25 years from now, there'll probably be a secondary plant, and it'll be further down, probably in or somewhere in that area that flows into Stockton Lake, because the south side, topography wise, does not facilitate it. But there is definitely, if there had to be growth or expansion, there's room to do it on this campus or this site. But at the same time, as the city continues to move, there's a likelihood that you could build what we call a package plant, a little bit smaller scale, somewhere else to meet another 1 million gallons or so. Okay, don't close it out yet.
No, I'm just.
So can you
waiting
cue
on-
up the other one? I want to talk about this letter that went to the residents. It wasn't a letter, I guess it was a notification that went to the residents.
I want to ask one more question real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
I know that history, what we just talked about, our water rates have always been considerably lower than sewer. Is it normal for them to be closer?
It is. I mean,
'Cause I was trying to Google here, look at city utilities and Nixa, and it looks like water and sewer is closer together for those cities. Is that more of what we see?
it is normal. It's what it should have been. They should have kept pace at the same time. But at the same time, if you don't know if you don't know if you're going to secure the funding and just raising them to raise them, that to me is a challenge. So they are normally very much more consistent because they cost. I mean, you got lines, you got to replace it, and the other thing about it is in what is something that the city has not done, and we didn't even consider this in the rate structure yet, but it's something that's going to happen because you ask a great question. You should be depreciating your assets too. So in the balance sheet or in the books, there should be setting aside money to do it. So basically, by setting aside the cash, or at least building cash to pay for your system, you're at least setting aside something. You're not setting aside anything on the way. That rate just pays your debt. It's not really setting aside anything on the depreciation side. That would be standard. That to me would be a standard practice as well. But we're not, I mean, if I did that, then it would be a $200 bill because you'd have to double the cost. Because what is it? I think it's, you get 30 years or 40 years out of the asset. So you take 150 million divided by 40. That's what you'd have to build that much cash per year to be ready to build another 150 million 25 years, 30 years from now. Actually, you'd get 40 years because it's a 40-year asset. But yes, I went long in that explanation, but it is very uncommon to have that much disparity in between the two. Shoot. Okay. Councilmember Neal, thank you for the first call yesterday, the message of what is this letter that we got in the mail, this notification. I'm going to do my absolute best to do something. We will be sending out a letter, I believe, by Friday of this week to explain and update. But it's the introduction to this EPA rule. It's called the Compliance with the EPA Lead and Copper Rule. What I'm going to start off by saying from the first side of it is I'm going to take ownership for the organization because a letter should have been attached to the top of it from me or someone just saying, hey, we're required to evaluate this. Your water is safe. The average lead in this city from what we have to test for is what they call less than 1 part per million. The highest we've ever tested at the oldest section of town at one location might have been 4 parts per million. The new EPA, the lead and copper rule or lead rule requires if it's exceeding 10. It's all generated and kind of modified after what happened in Flint, Michigan. But EPA dropped the rule on October 16th, actually October 8th, and the initial inventory deadline was October 16th. So they dropped the rule this year to have this inventory of your system. What's not included in this document or the work that I appreciate the staff pulling this together for me late today, is because we have such longevity in the workforce in our water side, because our crews that have been here for a certain period of time, they can safely identify that none of the city's water system, zero, has lead. So the report is, and what they were believing they were doing was they complied because the city has reported we have zero lead in our water system. What came out about 2 days before the letter was submitted last Friday, and they scrambled to get this together, was that, hey, we don't know, can you verify of all the public lines? So every house. So it was only about I think he said 300 or 400, Eric Brown, 300 or 400, that he could not just right off the top of his head, and he just, what we call pencil whip it. He said, I cannot do that. If you cannot write down that you know that all of it's gone, every resident had to get a letter. And they found out the 2 days before. They have talked to DNR. DNR is supposed to give us a report tomorrow basically saying that, yes, your criteria of being here this long and knowing the system, you fully comply with the whole thing. But the idea that someone's going to come in and turn off your water or shut off your water, come into your house and do that is not going to happen. But at the same time, there was nothing that really stated what our water levels were, that you don't have, we're not concerned with the lead in your house. But this doc, I wouldn't even call it a letter. I'd say this notification came from EPA to DNR. If you don't know how that works, DNR is an extension only of the EPA, so this came down from a federal rule. I will say this, not only did my phone ring quite a lot today and everyone else's, so did DNR's and EPA's, because this is when the notification was the 16th. Other communities that have lead have done more like the document or that like CU has done. There is a lead requirement. There are certain areas that's being addressed, but it was a much more. I can admit it doesn't require a notary, doesn't require coming into City Hall or an affidavit. What I'm asking is we will send out a letter in the next 3 days that pretty much explains, or hopefully I get the certification from DNR that it's all clear and not to worry about it whatsoever. But what we will own and what I will own on all of that side from myself is what I expect for myself to communicate to the citizens. And all I got was this. It looks like a very, very demanding letter to get this or something's going to happen. I mean, there's one part in it that even talks about it, spot digging your yard and identifying it. This is nothing more than looking for the inventory of where lead could possibly be. And what happens if you don't comply with it? You want to know what happens? So the answer is what happens if you don't comply? You get another notice that's saying, listen, you've been notified that, hey, you need to check this, but we've taken ourselves off the liability list. If you may have lead in your house and you get sick of it, you cannot come back on the city, EPA or DNR, because I believe it's all driven by what happened at Flint. So, and then I think, I have it, oops. Yeah, this is just the information that went out. This is the one I want to focus on. All customers had to be notified by November 6th, I think it was November, the deadline was November 15th, the notification to residents. So what I'm going to do is, what we will do is draft a letter basically saying, sorry for the health scare, because there's been several thinking, do I have lead in my system? Do we have lead in our water? We do not have lead in our water. We actually did a testing over a year. We doubled our sampling. And so our crews have, what I want to say for them, because I know that they've taken a lot of calls on this today, but I will say this, I'll own it. Our mission statement says they will be urgent and bold, not let fear dictate their direction. They did what they thought was the right thing, not to get us into another compliance order. They just did not. It's on me that I should have seen it and drafted it, and I do not put them out there for it. I put myself on it. And so the letter that will come out from the city about this will come from me, just stating that you're safe. And anything that, but this is what I will say to you, and I want to make this, I can't promise that the federal government, I can't promise that they will not come down with the rule that they could tell a water system something could happen in the future. All I know is not under the change of administration. I suspect that the rules may get changed. I think the timing of this rule comparatively is suspect from the timing of it. And I don't mind to say that. But at the same time I'm not going to blame DNR or EPA for our communication or my communication to the citizens on what that letter actually means versus the way it read. And there are other people that have not sent them out. They've chosen to mark that they don't have lead. And I can't speak for other communities or what they're doing. I just know that we'll learn from it and do better. And I'll send the letter out whenever I get the notification. There will be no letter goes out until I hear from DNR that that's all clear, because I want to make sure that that is all clear. But my staff, what they did, they believe they were just trying to save the city from getting in trouble. And they had 2 days to do it because they believed they were in compliance from October 16th. And they got questioned. Josh, am I getting this right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, they believe we are in compliance. And then the last minute, had another conversation with DNR, like, maybe you're not. So just be safe and sorry, but I wish there would have been a letter on the top of it that just said, hey, we're going to recheck and validate, but here's some notifications that are state issued, or here's, to your point, what's a phone number to call, what's an email address to ask questions. Because the way I look at it is, like I said, if my mother got this thing, I would have gotten a call. My mother's going to get one of these, and I'm going to get a call, just because people are sending them out. I mean, we're not the only city that sent these out, and but some had more information to them. Again, I'll say this on the other meeting too that will be live.
Thank you, David.
Anything else?
Any other questions from
Okay,
council?
thank you.
Thank you, David. We don't have anything.